There's one error that every AWS beginner hits, usually within their first week. Access denied. And the fix most people reach for, administrator access, is the worst thing you can do. I hit it early on. I spun up a Lambda function, tried to have it read from an S3 bucket, and got access denied. I didn't misconfigure the bucket or mistype the name. Rather, I straight up did not take the time to understand IAM. So I did what everyone else does. I attached administrator access. The error went away and I moved on. What I didn't think about at the time is I'd just given that Lambda function permission to do anything in my account. Delete databases, create resources that cost money, access every piece of data in every service. All because it needed to read from one S3 bucket. I talk to students and developers getting started with AWS all the time. And this is the pattern. Tutorial works, your own project doesn't. So you slap on administrator access. And now you have a security problem that you don't even know about. The access denied error was actually trying to help you. It was telling you exactly what permissions were missing. You just didn't know how to read it yet. That's what this video is for. 9 minutes and you'll know how to read it. IAM stands for Identity Access Management, but that name doesn't really help you. So let me put it differently. IAM is the bouncer at the door of every AWS service. Every time anything happens in your account, let's say you click a button on the console, your code calls an API, a Lambda function tries to read from a database, IAM checks two things. Who are you, and are you allowed to do this? If the answer to either question is no, you get access denied. That's all IAM does. Identity and permission. Those two questions are the entire foundation. The rest of this video is about how they get answered. There are three concepts you need to understand in IAM. Users, roles, and policy. These three are the ones that matter when you're getting started. An IAM user is a persistent identity. It represents a person who needs to log into the console or use the CLI. It has long-term credentials, a username and password for the console, or access keys for programmatic access. Think of it like an employee badge. It's yours. It has your name on it, and it works every day until someone revokes it. An IAM role is different. It's temporary. It doesn't belong to anyone permanently. Instead, it gets assumed, basically borrowed by whoever needs it at that moment. AWS gives the assumer temporary credentials that expire automatically. You can think of it like a visitor pass at an office. You check in, you get a badge, it works for a few hours, and then it stops working. Here's a good rule of thumb. If it's a person logging in, that's a user. If it's a service doing something, say a Lambda function, an EC2 instance, or another AWS account, that's a role. Roles are how Lambda functions access S3, and how one AWS account talks to another. The reason AWS recommends roles for services is that the credentials are always short-lived, so there's nothing sitting around that could be stolen. Now, policies. This is the part that took me the longest to internalize, but once it clicked, it was obvious. A policy is a JSON document that says, this identity is allowed to do these actions on these resources. Think of it like a permission slip. You attach policies to users or roles. The policy defines what they can do. Without a policy attached, an IAM identity is denied everything by default. You have to explicitly grant every permission. By default, you're not allowed to do anything. The mental model is this. A user is a person. A role is a service. And a policy defines what either of them is allowed to do. Identity plus permission. That's IAM. Now here's the security principle you need to keep in mind every time you work with IAM. It's called least privilege. And this isn't just about cloud computing. It's one of the most important ideas in all of computer security. Least privilege means give every identity only the permission it needs to do its job, and nothing more. You already saw the wrong version of this in my story. I gave a Lambda function permission to do everything because it needed to do one thing. Administrator access makes the error go away, but it also means anything in your account can do anything in your account. We're talking about deleting databases, spinning up expensive resources, even accessing data it has no business touching. That's like giving every employee in a company a key that opens every door because they need to open one door. So that Lambda function I mentioned at the start, here's the policy it actually needed. One action, one bucket. If that Lambda function ever gets compromised, the damage is limited to reading objects from the one bucket, not your entire account. That's least privilege in practice. You might be thinking, but figuring out all the exact permission sounds like a lot of work. And yes, it can take some extra minutes up front. But AWS gives you a tool called IAM Access Analyzer that looks at what your identity actually used over a period of time and generates a scope policy based on real activity. You let your service run, then Access Analyzer tells you what it actually needed. I'll drop a link to this in the description. All right, here's what I tell every student to do when they set up a new AWS account. First, lock down your root user. When you create an AWS account for the first time, you start as the root user. Root can do anything, including things no other identity can do, like closing the account entirely. It's the break glass in case of emergency identity. Enable MFA on root immediately. That's multi-factor authentication, so that even if someone gets your password, they still can't log in. Then stop using root for daily development. For your day-to-day access, set up a separate identity. AWS recommends IAM Identity Center, or IDC for short. For this, it gives you temporary credentials and works well if you ever add team members. For personal learning, creating an IAM user with MFA is fine too. But know that in a team or production setting, IDC is currently the best practice. When you build things, Lambda functions, EC2 instances, anything that runs code, those use roles, not users. They don't need long-lived access keys. They need roles with temporary credentials. Start with AWS Managed Policies when you're learning. AWS has pre-built policies for common use cases, and they're a reasonable starting point. Then, as you learn what your application actually needs, narrow the permissions down. You don't have to write perfect policies on day one, but you should be moving towards least privilege over time. And the thing that catches people, never put access keys in your code. Not in your source code, not in your config file you push to a public repo, not in environment variables committed to Git. Use roles instead. If you ever accidentally push AWS keys to a public repo, rotate them immediately. Bot scan for exposed keys within minutes. Access denied errors are IAM telling you exactly which permission is missing. Once you can read that message, you can stop guessing and start fixing. If you remember one thing from this video, make it least privilege. The checklist is in the description, bookmark it. I'll also drop links to the IAM docs, the blog post, and a link for free credits to get you started. Next time you get access denied, and you will, read the error, check the policy. You've got this.